Do I see the little germies running around on you? No, but I can see the symptoms of it, the cough, the stuffy nose. I can look at you and go, I bet you're probably sick, because I can see the symptoms of it. Cold medicines, not that. They don't actually heal you. All they do is they just deal with the symptoms of it. We can look out in space and we can see that there's this ripple in time-space. That's how we detect the black hole. We can't see the thing itself. Sometimes in your life you cannot see the trauma itself. You can't remember the trauma itself, but you can see the effects of it. Why am I so angry? Why am I so short-tempered? Why do I feel like whenever something's wrong with one of my friends, I have to step in to fix it? Why do I feel so responsible for all the bad things that happen around me? Why am I so anxious? Why am I so on edge all the time? All of these things have a logic to it. There is no, that's just the way that I am. What there is you're seeing the symptoms of the black hole. You're seeing the symptoms of the illness. What you can do is once you see the symptoms of it, you can now start to reason back and realize, this must have been something like this that happened to me. Now the question becomes, how can I become better? Do I want to stay an angry person? Do I want to stay an anxious person? Do I want to stay a depressed person? Do I want to stay an uncertain person? Do I want to stay an unconfident person? Or do I want to become something better than all of that? None of us is destined to be what we presently are. I don't know about you, but that's a relief, by the way, for a lot of people. We don't have to stay what we presently are. We can become something better. But it requires those two things that we talked about. It requires suffering, and it requires recovery. The suffering part, I got news for you, man. Life is suffering. You don't get to choose not to suffer. But freedom is to be able to choose what you're going to suffer for. I think what you're going to find is that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to grow in life without pain. How do you grow physically stronger? Tear your muscles. And then you have to, and by the way, just tearing your muscles isn't enough. What if you go to the gym on Monday and you tear your muscles? And then you go back Tuesday and you do the exact same exercises. And you go back Wednesday and Thursday. You never actually get stronger because the growth part, the becoming stronger part happens in two phases. First, the terror, the pain, the suffering. Then, the healing. So you have to be able to do both parts. So this is important because you'll find people who will go through suffering in life or they'll feel some kind of pain in life, but then they never deal with how to get over it. They never actually deal with the recovery part, the healing part. We intuitively know that if I tear my muscles, I have to let them recover and rest and recover so that I can make them stronger again. But we'll undergo some kind of an emotional thing and we'll never deal with it. And we'll just say, no, I can't think about that. I just have to move on. And think about the kind of advice that we give people when you go through something like that. You encounter some kind of terrible tragedy, and we tell people, you know what? You just got to get over it. Okay, how? You just have to move on. And then we're like, yeah. So how do you do that? Do you just ignore it? And that's usually what we mean when we tell people to do that. You just have to ignore it. But in the same way, if you don't actually recover from that injury, you never actually become emotionally stronger either. It's weird how we're these two different things going on at once. We have a body and we have a mind or a soul. At the very least, we can say we have a consciousness, like a psyche, a mind. And these two things operate, so even though one is physical and one is immaterial, it's not physical, they still operate in a lot of the same ways. How do you become stronger through them? Well, you've got to tear those muscles, or you have to find yourself in an uncomfortable place, or you have to undergo some level of suffering. And then you also have to recover from it. If you don't recover from it, then no growth happens. So this is why we'll find ourselves, like, for example, we'll be an angry personality. And you can ask a person, why are you so angry? In fact, better yet, someone can ask you, why are you such an angry person? And you can say, hands in my pockets, that's just the way I am. And if you say that about yourself, that's just the way that I am, well, then that's all you'll ever be. You'll always be an angry person, and you won't know why. But there's a reason for it. There's always a logic for it. There's always a reason for it. There's always a cause for it. You might not remember it, or you might have been so young when it happened that you kind of shelf it away, or you might have been so young when it happened that you just literally can't remember it. You didn't have long-term memories at that time. But all of these things that we encounter, everything that we encounter in life goes into our minds. We just can't always remember everything. This is why suddenly you might have a memory like, oh yeah, that's right, that happened. I don't know if any of you guys have like a friend who can remind you about something that you did last summer that you completely forgot about. And as soon as they remind you, you're like, oh yeah, and then you remember it in your mind as clear as day. That's right, I forgot about that. And the same can be true about the emotional things that you go through. If somebody we mentioned earlier, if somebody was abused, let's say when they were a little kid, how do they know that they were abused? Well, you don't form long-term memories until you're about 5 years old. So anything that happens to you before 5 just kind of goes into your mind. But you can't remember it. You don't have the capacity to remember those things. So if you have a memory from when you were like 2 years old, you probably don't have a memory from when you were 2 years old. It's probably what we call invented memories, fictional memories. You're just kind of like, your mind is constructing a memory. You're not remembering a real one. You're making up a new one in your mind. Because, again, that capacity doesn't form until about 5. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't still affect your personality. The personality seems to get shaped before then. So it's weird. You don't have the ability to remember anything before 5, but your personality is generally formed by 5. So that tells us that those things go into your mind. And it's almost unfair because we don't have the ability to deal with those things because we don't have the maturity yet. So now the question is, how do we become more mature? Well, we can recognize it. How might a person know that they were abused before 5 if they have no memory of it? Anybody into space? Really like space? Stars? Yeah. So how do you know if there's a black hole out in space? We can't see it. Space is black. The hole itself is black. So how do we have the ability to detect them? Because you don't see the thing itself. You see the symptoms of the thing. So for example, if you guys walked in here and let's say one of you walked in here and you were like, what can I maybe surmise about you?
You're sick.
You're sick. Do I see the little germs running around on you? No, but I can see the symptoms of it. The cough, the stuffy throat, the stuffy nose. I can look at you and go, I bet you're probably sick because I can see the symptoms of it. Cold medicines, all that, they don't actually heal you. All they do is they just deal with the symptoms of it. We can look out in space and we can see that there's this ripple in time-space. That's how we detect the black hole. We can't see the thing itself. Sometimes in your life you cannot see the trauma itself. You can't remember the trauma itself, but you can see the effects of it. Why am I so angry? Why am I so short-tempered? Why do I feel like whenever something's wrong with one of my friends, I have to step in to fix it? Why do I feel so responsible for all the bad things that happen around me? Why am I so anxious? Why am I so on edge all the time? All of these things have a logic to it. There is no, that's just the way that I am. What there is you're seeing the symptoms of the black hole. You're seeing the symptoms of the illness. And so what you have to do, if you want to, I guess you don't have to do it, but what you can do is once you see the symptoms of it, you can now start to reason back and realize, this must have been something like this that happened to me. Now the question becomes, how can I become better? Do I want to stay an angry person? Do I want to stay an anxious person? Do I want to stay a depressed person? Do I want to stay an uncertain person? Do I want to stay an unconfident person? Or do I want to become something better than all of that? Because none of us is destined to be what we presently are. I don't know about you, but that's a relief, by the way, for a lot of people. We don't have to stay what we presently are. We can become something better. But it requires those two things that we've talked about. It requires suffering, and it requires recovery. The suffering part, I got news for you, man. Life is suffering. You're going to hear me say that probably 1,000,000 times this year, guys. Life is suffering. You don't get to choose not to suffer. But freedom is to be able to choose what you're going to suffer for. You've got these options. I've suffered in my past. I can live with the suffering of being anxious and depressed and angry all the time, or I can live with the suffering of overcoming those things, challenging those things, which means going into my own mind, going into my own psyche, and dealing with the really uncomfortable parts of myself. But those are your choices. There's nothing else besides that. It's part of life to suffer. The good news is that that's where we can overcome. That's where the growth happens. If we're never suffering, we have no reason to move forward. If I walk up to you, and if you're standing there and I walk up to you, I put my finger in your arm like this, you won't move unless you're uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, well, then you move. Most of us will only move as far as we have to get away from the discomfort. That's one thing to do. You can get away from the discomfort, or you can overcome it, which means having to deal with its causes. And so, in the case of like an emotional suffering, you say it's hard to forget the pain. It's hard to forget the pain. Maybe not even the cause of it, but the pain itself lasts, it lingers, like anything else. And it's even harder to remember the sweetness. And there are very good reasons for this. Sweetness is not a danger to your, well, actually that's not true. I was gonna say sweetness is not a danger to your life. It actually is, but just not in the ways that we think of it as. Sweetness, you can become so complacent and so comfortable that you just sit and you never become better. In other words, you can reach a point in your life when you're so comfortable that you're like, I don't have to do anything. I can just chill. And a lot of people are like this. This is true. I mean, you go to work, I guess, do some hours, spend some time in the bathroom without actually working, and just kind of navigate through life hoping to get to a weekend. This is one way to live, this is true. But you can become so complacent. I don't know if you guys, I'll talk more about this later in the year, but I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of tenure with teachers, if you know what this is. It's spelled T-E-N-U-R-E. In short, what that means is that as a teacher, it is almost impossible to fire me. The only way that a teacher can get fired is we have to be convicted of a felony, and the only reason we get fired for that is because if you can't have a teaching credential while you have with a felony, if that makes sense. So you get a felony, you lose your credential, then they just can't hire you. That's why you're fired, because you don't have a credential. But beyond that, misdemeanors are fine. Student complaints never amount to anything because we have this thing called tenure, which basically means I can't be fired unless I'm convicted of a felony. Knowing that, and by the way, you get that automatically when you start the first day of your third year as a teacher in a public school. Make sense? Okay, having said that, knowing what you now know about that, maybe some things will make sense to you. Do you have those teachers who will come in and say, whatever, I get paid anyway, and go sit down, not care? And those people who just phone it in, they're doing the same things every single year. Why? They've got tenure. They're complacent. There's no incentive. We get paid the same. If all of my students get A's or all of my students get F's, we get paid the same. If everybody goes to college or nobody goes to college, if everybody gets a job afterwards or nobody gets a job afterwards, if 100% of you say you love it or 100% of you say you hate it, it's all the same. None of that impacts the teacher's the teacher's career. I know it sucks, but it's true. So now, having said that, can you see why some people behave the way they behave as teachers? They phone it in. Whether everyone does great or badly, I get paid the same. And they don't have any aspirations of becoming better. So that means the motivation has to come from within. Maybe we might agree then that some people are just too complacent in their careers. They don't feel the need to grow from themselves. And now you can see what the danger of that is. There are some people who are so on edge because they can be fired at any second. And so there's always this constant hope to improve, maybe. So it's true, you can become too complacent. So sweetness can actually damage your life. But most of us are programmed to realize that the things that impact our lives heavily are the negative things. And so we're pre-programmed to remember the pain. We're pre-programmed to remember scars and to learn the lessons. I have a scar on my stomach. I learned an important lesson from this scar on my stomach. You know what my lesson was? If someone is standing in front of you with a knife and they say they're going to stab you, they just might. I got stabbed in the stomach because somebody was standing with a knife. I thought in my head, this guy's not going to stab me, is he? And then I found out, yeah, he did. He stabbed me in the stomach. Messed up one of my favorite shirts at the time. So there's a scar that I look at it, it actually makes me laugh now because you realize how stupid that really was. He stabbed me and I looked at it. He looked at me, I looked at him. We were like, did that just happen? You know, I have another one on my arm right here where I got slashed and not stabbed. So all of these little scars are reminders about things. I've got one above my forehead right here, which is when I was a little boy, I jumped off of my bunk bed because I thought I could fly. I hit my head on a toy chest. I was 3 years old. I learned a lesson. I cannot fly. Well, maybe, but not with that attitude, you know? Every little scar is a reminder that I remember that's why that's there. But the emotional ones are just the same too. So we don't learn from peace, we learn from difficulty. But we also are programmed to try to run away from the difficulty. So that's for another time. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Dope. Happy Monday.